can we be good without God? What's the moral argument for the existence of God? Does evolution give us a better grounding for objective moral values and duties? Or does God? Those are some of the few questions that we're going to be covering on today's video. Hi, I'm Raphael, former atheist turned Christian, answering your Bible questions and helping you navigate through this culture through a biblical lens. Now, if you haven't done so or you're new to the channel, please subscribe and also hit that bell icon. That way you get notifications when I drop new videos. Now, with that being said, let's get started with today's video. So a couple of weeks ago, I had shared this meme on Instagram. And the comment section did not disappoint. Some of the comments basically helped prove the meme, and other comments actually brought up some good questions that I thought would be good enough to go over in a video and answer. So that's what we're going to be doing today. And our first question comes from Caveman Raveman, and he asked, what is the moral argument for the existence of God? Well, Caveman Raveman, there's multiple different arguments that Christians make, but the one that we're going to be going over today comes from the one and only William Lane Craig. And his argument goes a little bit like this. If God does not exist, objective moral values and duties do not exist. Objective moral values and duties do exist, therefore God exists. Now, before we start going over some of the premises of the argument, something that's going to be beneficial for us is if we define some of the terms. Like, for example, what do we mean when we say values and duties, or objective and subjective? In understanding some of those terms, it will help clear up or at least help answer some of the future questions that might come up. So when we talk about values and duties, values have to do with whether something is good or bad, and duties have to do with whether something is right and wrong. Now you might ask yourself, well, aren't those two things the same thing? And well, no. Like, for example, it would be good to be a firefighter or a police officer, but you're not morally obligated to be one. It wouldn't be wrong for you to be one. And so values have to do with something's worth, while duties have to do with something being obligatory. Now, when we talk about objective versus subjective, what we mean when something is subjective, that it's independent of people's opinions. And when we say that something is subjective, it's dependent on people's opinions. Now, for example, something objective would be like saying 2 plus 2 equals 4. Even if there were no people on the earth, it would still be true that 2 plus 2 equals 4, because that's independent of people's opinions. And even if I had convinced everyone with some magical potion that 2 plus 2 equals 5, it would still be true that 2 plus 2 equals 4. And so an example of something being subjective would be like pineapples don't go on pizza. They do. Or strawberry ice cream is the best ice cream. Those are things that are dependent on people's opinions, but they're not true in and of themselves. So now that we've gone over the premises of the argument and define our terms, I think what would be helpful for us is to go over some of the other comments that were left on the meme, because in doing so, it'll help us kind of answer the question as to why God is the best explanation for objective moral values and duties. So the second question that we're going to be going over comes from Corny as Hell. And to summarize his point, he said that animals in nature show empathy and all these other kinds of emotions, and they can read, and so morals exist even without the necessity of believing in God. And again, this is a misunderstanding of what the argument is trying to point to. Of course, we believe that there are, atheists or people who don't believe in God can be good and do good things, but that's not the question. Is can there be objective moral values and duties if God does not exist? So now that we've gone over that common misconception, we can move into another way in which atheists try to have morals without God. And that is by naturalism. And through naturalism, they'll say something along the lines that we've received or have acquired these morals through our evolutionary process and social conditioning. Now, the first problem that's usually pointed out within that view is that if that's just the way that we've evolved, it doesn't make those morals objectively true. That's just the way that we've evolved. And this is a problem that even Darwin himself pointed out. And he wrote, If men were reared under precisely the same conditions as hive bees, there can hardly be a doubt that our unmarried females would, like the worker bees, think it a sacred duty to kill their brothers, and mothers would strive to kill their fertile daughters, and no one would think of interfering. So in other words, why should our morals be objectively true and not the morals of other species? And to believe that we have some superiority over them would be to fall into what's known as speciesism, which brings us to our second argument against naturalism. And that will be that within naturalism, we are just another animal in the animal kingdom. And we know that animals don't have any moral obligations to one another. For example, when a lion kills a gazelle or a zebra, it kills a gazelle and a zebra, but it doesn't murder the gazelle. And in the same way, when a shark forcibly copulates with a female shark, it forcibly copulates, but it doesn't rape the shark. And so in naturalism, where are these moral obligations coming from? I mean, sure, those things might not be biologically and socially advantageous, and in them being that, they've become taboo or not preferable. But that doesn't mean that they're objectively wrong. It just means that they're not preferable. And it becomes no different than somebody who is at the dinner table and burps really loud. Sure, it's not preferable that somebody does that, but it doesn't make it morally wrong. So within naturalism, you don't get objective moral values and duties like killing, stealing, and rape being objectively wrong. The best thing you get is subjective morals, which become nothing more than preferences like pineapples don't go on pizza or strawberry ice cream is good. That's the best you get within naturalism. Now, another argument that's brought up is what's known as moral Platonism, which comes from Plato. And in it, he basically says that things like kindness, mercy, and justice, that these things exist on their own as sort of self-existing ideas. Now, against moral Platonism, there are a couple things that people usually point out. And one is that it just doesn't seem to make sense. Like, for example, when we think about things like justice and kindness, these are things that we attribute to persons. But it's hard to imagine how, if there were no humans, how kindness and justice would exist. Like, moral values we attribute those to persons. So it's hard to attribute justice and kindness as just an abstraction. The second thing that people point out is that, let's say for the sake of the argument, that we agree that these moral values like justice, kindness, and mercy exist in and of themselves. Why should I be obligated to do those? Not only that, but if we accept that things like love, mercy, and justice exist, we would also point out that things like hatred and selfishness also exist. So why should I be obligated to follow the mercy, kindness, and justice versus hatred, greed, and selfishness? In moral Platonism, there's no obligation as to why we should follow one or the other. And so after looking at these naturalistic explanations to ground objective moral values and duties, we see how they utterly fail to do so. And so how do we ground objective moral values and duties that we so intuitively know that we have? Because the natural can't explain it, so it has to transcend the natural. But not only that, we saw how these moral values are attributed to persons, like mercy, loving, and kindness. But for us Christians, not only do we have the moral values, but we also have the duties, the obligations within God, because God commands us not to do certain things. And so God is the best explanation as to why we have objective moral values and duties, where within the naturalistic world, you can't. Or as it's sometimes put, laws come from lawgivers. And if these objective moral values and duties are laws that don't come from the natural, they must come from a lawgiver that transcend the natural. Now, the last argument that we're going to be going over is known as Euthyphro's dilemma. And this comes from one of Plato's dialogues where Socrates is having a conversation with Euthyphro, and Socrates brings up this argument to him, and he says, "Is something good because God wills it, or does God will something because it is good?" Now you might wonder, well, how is this an argument against God being the best explanations for objective moral values and duties? Well, if you look at both horns of the dilemma, if you choose the first horn that says that God wills something and so therefore it is good, then what you get is arbitrary objective moral values and duties, because God could have so easily chosen for rape and murder to have been the good. And so then what you get is sort of whoever's the mightiest gets to decide what is good or what is bad. And if you choose the second horn, which says that God saw that it was good, so then he wills it, then you have objective moral values and duties being independent of God, which then contradicts the first premise of the argument. So then which of the two horns do we choose? Do we go with the first one or the second one? And well, the answer is none of them, because the Euthyphro dilemma is what's known as a false dichotomy, meaning that there's a better choice out there, a third choice, and that is that God wills something because he is good, or in other words, God's own nature is the standard of good, and so then his commandments are just expressions of his own nature. And so once again, our opponent's arguments utterly fail, leaving the first premise of the argument standing. Now that'll be it for today's video. I hope you guys join me for the second part, where we answer more of the questions from the meme and also just tackle the second premise of the argument. If you guys like the video, then please like, share, and subscribe, and don't forget to hit that bell icon. That way you get notifications when I drop the second part. Now with that being said, thank you guys for watching. God bless.